you. Thank you. Well, now that I'm speechless, let's all go. Thank you very much. This morning I'm going to talk with you about transitions. And indeed, this is a transition this morning for me because it's my last opportunity to speak to you here in chapel. I can't tell you how many times I've done this over the years, but I've always appreciated the opportunity to share from my heart to yours in chapel settings like this. In just a few days, few weeks, the senior class, the class of 2011, will transition out of Gordon College. And that transition, I hope, is one of a bright future as they look forward to where God will lead them next. Will lead you if you're in that class. This is a time of transition for my wife and me. And these transitions have been part of our lives all the way along. We've had some great transitions. I remember the day that I met Mrs. Carlberg, Jan, in college. She was working as a salad lady in the dining hall. And I was the milkman in the dining hall. So we have a long history of preparing meals together. I remember the day we got married, the day we went on to graduate school, and I got my degrees, and during that period of time, our children, Chad and Heather, were born. These were all wonderful transition times. And Gordon is going to be facing a transition in just a few months as D. Michael Lindsay and his wife Rebecca come to lead this college. They're a wonderful young couple. You met them just last week if you were in chapel on Monday. They bring energy, they bring vision, they bring a hope for the future of Gordon College. I've just known them for a week. I met them just a few hours before you did. But already, Mrs. Carlberg and I have grown to love them very much. They're dear people, and they will infuse themselves into this community as a partnership dedicated to fulfilling the mission of Gordon College. No, I'm not going to tell you what the mission is if you don't know it yet. But, you know, sometimes transitions can be tough, and we're facing that too as we look forward to leaving this community, a place that has been home for us for 35 years. We'll miss you, the students. We'll miss the faculty and staff, most who have come here while we have been serving at Gordon. We'll miss Wilson House, the only place that our grandchildren know as our home. And they love to come and visit us at Wilson House. We're going to miss that too. Sometimes transitions are difficult, and sometimes they're downright threatening and scary. Imagine my surprise when I was faced with a totally unexpected transition just a few weeks ago, when the doctor informed me that I had cancer, lymphoma to be precise, and that I was going to go through a stage of life where I would be receiving treatments in order to knock that cancer out. That caused a lot of anxiety for us and caused me to reflect in different ways about this transition out of Gordon College and into the future. I remember asking a lot of questions immediately. Well, do I have the right doctor? Is there a second opinion that's needed here? Do I need to have more tests? Will I be able to finish my leadership role at Gordon strong, a goal that we had set together, Jan and I? Yes. The answers came. I will be able to continue with God's help and God's strength and a wonderful team here at Gordon. But it's going to be a rough next few months as I go through this period of transition. Now, those are the immediate questions. But then other questions came to my mind in the middle of the night. And I found that instead of waking up at the normal time, I was waking up at 3 in the morning. And these questions were flooding in. Why? Why is this happening now? It's just the end of my leadership and our experiences of being a team together at Gordon College, and I'm coming down with cancer. What does the future hold? And where is God in all of this? Where is God in all of this? Does God have anything for me? And you know, I began to see that the Psalms, especially the psalm that was read for us this morning, Psalm 63, had some answers for me, some encouragement for me. David says in Psalm 63, "On my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night because you are my help. I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you. Your right hand upholds me." And I had a sense of peace that God was speaking to me as he had spoken to David long ago in those early morning hours when all these questions were flooding into my life. Now, I don't have answers to all those questions, but I join others in asking the questions. Of course, the big question is, why do bad things happen to people who are trying to be faithful to God and to his word? A friend of mine, Dr. Timothy Johnson, who used to be the editor of the ABC Evening News Medical Report, wrote a book called Finding God in the Questions. Dr. Johnson says in his book, old questions during transitions often take on critical importance again. And the question of why is one that is uppermost in the minds of everyone who have unexpected transitions come into their lives. We don't have a complete answer to that question. The theologians have pondered it for many, many years. And I assure you that it can't be answered glibly. Dr. Johnson suggests that theologians have said if indeed we had a certainty that all would be well, we would not have the need to turn to God. And God would not be giving us free will. God gives us free will. God gives the universe freedom to develop and unfold as its evolution occurs and it goes forward. So we have freedom in our lives. Freedom sometimes leads to bad choices by individuals, by organizations, by governments that do bring suffering, choices that bring suffering and death and chaos. But the question still remains, what about undeserved suffering? And all we can do in trying to answer that is to consult God's Word and see what God tells us about it. And this morning I'd like to set aside the why question because we don't have the opportunity in the few minutes that we have before us to answer that. And indeed, there is no answer for that question completely. But we can answer the question of who is with us in times of suffering? Who is with me as I face the next few weeks and months of uncertainty? I do know that God is with me. The presence of Jesus is going to be in my life. Here's some of the things that I'm learning as I go through these times of uncertainty and these times of unwanted transition. Music becomes a refreshment to my soul. All kinds of music, from the soloist singing with a guitar, to the great choir singing, to jazz, to gospel. All of it is sent by God to bring refreshment to my soul. And God speaks in fresh ways to me by his word. And I find his word is much more meaningful to me now as I'm trying to wrestle through these issues. He speaks to me through his Spirit, and especially he speaks to me through you and through others who have expressed their concern, their support, and their love. A few weeks ago, we gathered with the presidents and the spouses of the Christian College Consortium. This is something we do a couple of times a year as we plan together activities that will benefit all of the consortium schools, and as we seek to support one another in the trials and the uncertainties that involve being a college president. And you know, as we met together, I shared what was coming in my life, and the group just had an outpouring of love and support and concern for me. And quietly, one of the spouses came to me and she said, "Judd, I have suffered with cancer for many, many years, and I can tell you that God touched me through that at the core of my being. Be prepared for God to touch you." And she wasn't exuberant. She wasn't overstating what had happened to her, but she had a quiet calm that God had spoken to her. My relationship with my wife, Jan, is deepening in ways that I never expected. We've always been in love ever since the salad girl days in college. But the love is so much deeper. The understanding is so much greater. The wisdom is so much more real and helpful and supportive. My children, Chad, who's here with his wife, Christina, this morning, and my daughter, Heather, and her husband, Matt, who are doctors in Atlanta, Georgia. My children are extremely supportive. I love it when I get a call from Heather or from Matt, and they ask about the latest protocol, the latest word, the latest test, and then they give me their insights and tell me what I ought to be looking for. Or when Chad or Christina call and say, "Hey, we'd like to come over and make dinner for you. We'd like you to have an evening of quiet and let the grandchildren just sit on your laps and you tell stories." That's healing. And God is showing up when they show up. The other evening, actually they did that, came over on Saturday night, and Maggie was along. We were going to take Maggie to see A Winter's Tale. We went over to the theater, and Maggie saw it was a dark room, and she wasn't too sure she wanted to go in there. Finally, I convinced her that those people were not going to be scaring her, and so she stayed for a little while, but she got tired and said, "Let's go home and have a root beer float. That's a better alternative." So we went home, and I took her home. Mrs. Carlberg stayed for the whole evening, and when I got home, Maggie I said, "It's time to get to bed now," and she was uncertain about that because her mom and dad had left and they weren't there. And finally, I said, "Maggie, we'll have a root beer float, we'll tell stories, we'll pray, and then you can go to sleep." And she took my face in her hands and she said, "Popo," that's what she calls me, "Popo, you're my best guy." And then I thought to myself, boy, I hope she thinks I'm her best guy for the rest of my life. And their little sister, Kate, who's also with us this morning, sat on my lap at dinner and just looked up to me with those big dark eyes. And I thought, this is wonderful. These grandchildren provide hope for the future. And a future I'll never see, Mrs. Carlberg will never see, but these kids will live it. And when Luke and Lily and little Basil come to visit us from Atlanta, I have that same sense that these children are being formed to be the leaders, the teachers, the salt and the light in our world going forward. They're ministering to me during this time. And then there are many here in the Gordon community who are ministering, not only to me, but to scores of others who are struggling with the same kinds of things that I'm struggling with, and I'm mindful of that. I just happen to have the position where I can talk with you about it. But there are faculty members who are struggling with cancer or other illnesses, and many staff people who are struggling today. And you know, as they struggle, and as we look at the future and we see that it's an uncertain future, I find that we all sense God's presence is deeper. I have a better ability now and a better understanding as I go through this experience of identifying with the people around me that are having difficult times and are struggling with illnesses and uncertainties in their families. You know, we're at this time of year where we are celebrating Lent in the church calendar. And this is a time when we focus on the suffering of Jesus. Jesus went first in suffering for us, and he continues to suffer with us so that we can identify with him and he can identify with us, all of us who are suffering either physically or emotionally or in relationships. Jesus is there suffering with us. John Stott, the great theologian in England, says the cross tells us that God is not at all separate or detached from the suffering of this world, but he's fully engaged with it. I appreciate some of the signs of identification with my suffering that all of you or some of you have expressed. Just the other day, a group of guys from Wilson Hall called my office and said, "What can we do for you to show our appreciation and our support?" And I sent back word, "I'd love it if you'd wash my car. It looks like it's been through a zillion different blizzards this year, and it's never been touched." So they came over and did that. And I don't even know all the guys who did it. They came over, took the car away, and it came back looking beautiful, ready for spring. And then the other morning, I received a package in the mail, in the intercampus mail, from a group of women who are the Gordon Prayer Warriors. They are the women who meet every month and they pray over lunch for people and for needs and for you. And they had sent along a prayer shawl that they had knit in their group while they were praying. This prayer shawl is something that many people who have gone through suffering on campus wear. And I put it on. And it reminded me of the prayers of hundreds and hundreds of people for me and for others who are suffering in this community. Notes, assurances of prayer, encouragement of all sorts have flooded into my email, and people have expressed it personally, and I really appreciate that. It makes a huge difference to anyone who's suffering physically, emotionally, and in relationships. The other day, I noticed that as I introduced people to President-elect Michael Lindsay, we had a reception line. I noticed that a lot of people, just quietly, who knew that something was up, hugged me. And I'm not a big hugger, as you know. Well, my wife thinks I am, but not many others. And actually, I'm beginning to like it, so keep it up. Through this experience, God promises to be with us. God is walking with me, and I sense that. And if any of you today are struggling and you are suffering, God is walking with you. And as I read in a deeper way both the Old Testament and the New Testament, I find that reassurance comes through time and time again. Isaiah 43:2. When you pass through the waters, I will be there with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. The Lord goes with us. He's there with us. Now, God doesn't promise us freedom from suffering. Obviously, we all go through it at some point in our lives. And there are some indications in Scripture of why we go through suffering. James 1, verses 1 and 2 in the Phillips translation suggests that good can come out of suffering, and I believe that. I believe that with all my heart. Here's what it says. When all kinds of trials and temptations crowd into your lives, my brothers and sisters, don't resent them as intruders, but welcome them as friends. Realize that they come to test your faith and to produce in you the quality of endurance. I pray that this will be true for anyone here who's struggling, and that it will be true in my life. With David, I want to find God in these transitions, in these tough times, in these uncertainties. And I invite you now to close with me in prayer as we contemplate what it means to rest in the shadow of the wings of God. We're going to be led in our prayer through a song by Fernando Ortega, an artist, Christian artist who has meant much to me during these times. This is Psalm 63 in music.